It was Christmas Eve, and the living room smelled like cinnamon, pine, and nostalgia. We were gathered around the fire, sipping cider while my mom brought out an old photo album she hadn't opened in years. I sat beside her, flipping through pages filled with yellowed photos of birthdays, school events, family vacations. Everyone laughed at awkward haircuts and outdated clothes until we reached a certain page. I felt the energy shift. My hand paused on a picture from a summer picnic. My mom, young and vibrant, holding a toddler that wasn't me. My fingers brushed the image and a cold knot formed in my chest. Beside me, Claire leaned in, studying the photo in silence. Her eyes sharpened and she whispered, "Don't you see it?" My heart pounded. I looked closer. The background, the people. And suddenly, my reality shifted. The man standing behind my mom wasn't just a neighbor or friend. The face, though younger, was unmistakable. This wasn't a random moment. It was a connection I wasn't meant to notice. Claire quietly closed the album, her lips pressed in a line. I followed her out into the hallway. "You need to know something," she said. Her voice was calm but heavy, like she'd rehearsed this conversation for years. Over the next few weeks, Claire revealed the truth. Hidden betrayals, a decades-old cover-up. My family wasn't just broken, it had been twisted by someone who had no right to be part of it. A man who had inserted himself into our lives, into our memories, and into me. She had known for a long time, but she hadn't been able to prove it. Until that night, when that photo reappeared. She had been watching him for years, tracking every move, every lie. Not out of anger, but for justice. Quietly, she'd gathered everything. Bank statements, old letters, DNA. And when it was time, she didn't explode. She filed. Through courtrooms and silence, through hearings and threats, Claire stayed focused. She didn't just want revenge. She wanted accountability. She didn't destroy him with rage. She dismantled him with facts. Bit by bit, the truth surfaced, and his empire of manipulation collapsed. People he'd fooled for decades turned their backs. His reputation gone. His grip on our family broken. I watched her fight not just for me, but for herself. She wasn't doing this to punish someone. She was doing it to free the people he held hostage with lies. And as the verdict came in, and he was finally forced to face what he'd done, I realized something. Claire wasn't just the one who opened my eyes. She was the one who put our story back together, on our terms. Christmas was always a warm time for our family. Even though not everything was perfect, we made it feel magical. String lights, cookies in the oven, songs playing softly in the background. That year it was colder than usual, and we were all wrapped up under blankets. When my mom decided to pull out the old photo album, she hadn't touched it in over a decade. I remember the way her hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages, like she was nervous about what memories would resurface. We all leaned in, laughing at old clothes, old faces, and moments we'd forgotten. Until one page stopped us. It was a photo from the late 90s, a picnic I didn't remember. In the foreground was my mom, smiling with a toddler on her lap. The child wasn't me. The date didn't match my age. But it wasn't the kid that caught my attention. It was the man in the background. His arm around my mom, his smile too familiar. Claire leaned closer. I saw her body go still. Her breath slowed and she whispered, "Don't you see it?" At first, I didn't. I thought maybe it was someone who just looked familiar. But as I looked closer, my stomach dropped. That man, he wasn't supposed to be in our past. He was part of our present, someone we'd trusted for years. Someone who had been close. Too close. I looked at my mom, but she was already turning the page, avoiding my eyes. That night, after everyone went to bed, Claire sat beside me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just started talking. "That picture," she said, "wasn't just a memory. It's evidence." She explained how she had suspected something for years. Whispers. Inconsistencies. Things that didn't line up. She'd kept it all to herself, waiting for the right moment. That picture was the last piece. Claire had been building a case, not in rage, but with precision. She was a lawyer now, but even before that, she had been collecting pieces. Things people said, documents, old records, even DNA results. She had waited years, making sure everything was real, airtight. That man in the photo had manipulated more than just my mom. He'd controlled our whole narrative. He had twisted everything, and no one had noticed. Until now. I asked her why she didn't tell me sooner. She said she wanted to be sure, not to ruin lives based on suspicions. But that photo? It confirmed everything. And now that I had seen it too, it was time. Claire wasn't emotional. She was focused. She told me what would happen next. Legal motions, hearings, exposure. I didn't sleep that night. Everything I thought I knew felt false. But Claire, she looked like she had finally breathed after years underwater. Claire had always been the observant one, the quiet force in the room who noticed what others didn't. While everyone else smiled at the old photo album, lost in nostalgia, her eyes scanned every detail like a detective. She didn't laugh. When my mom recounted stories about family vacations or holiday dinners, instead she leaned forward, eyes narrowed, following some invisible thread I hadn't yet noticed. That's what made her whisper hit me so hard. Don't you see it? At first I didn't know what she meant. My eyes drifted across the photo again, my mom, the little boy, the backdrop of a sunlit picnic, and then him, the man in the background, familiar but distant. My mind tried to protect me, to blur the details, to dismiss it as coincidence. But Claire saw the truth instantly. She always had a way of cutting through noise. The quiet question wasn't just a nudge. It was a signal that everything we thought we knew was about to unravel. That night, the mood shifted. Claire barely touched her food. I watched her avoid my mom's gaze, choosing her words carefully. She had known, or at least suspected, for a long time. Her silence wasn't indifference, and it was strategy. She was waiting for a moment like this, for the past to reveal itself in a way no one could deny. That photo, dusty and forgotten, wasn't just a memory. It was evidence. We stayed up after everyone went to bed. I sat on the edge of the couch, album still on my lap, heart thudding. Claire sat across from me, hands clasped together, her voice steady but heavy with something I couldn't name. Maybe guilt? Maybe resolve. She said the photo confirmed a pattern she'd been quietly tracking for years. A pattern of presence. That man who had woven himself into our lives had always been around, too close to my mother, too involved in decisions that weren't his to make. Claire didn't jump to conclusions. She had studied law precisely because of situations like this, injustice hidden behind charm, truth buried under carefully managed appearances. She had seen how lies can live in plain sight, unchallenged, if no one is willing to ask the hard questions. That night she asked all of them. Why was he in that photo? Why hadn't anyone questioned it? Why had my mother never explained his role in our lives? The questions burned, but they also opened doors. Claire wasn't accusing blindly. She had facts. Records of financial ties, documents signed quietly over the years. And deeper still, emotional manipulation, patterns of control, isolation. Things we had mistaken for care and closeness now looked a lot like power plays. Claire laid it all out slowly, methodically, like she was presenting a case in court. Only this courtroom was my living room. I listened, torn between horror and relief. Horror at what had been hidden for so long. Relief that someone, at least one person, had seen it and never let it go. Claire's whisper in that moment wasn't just a revelation. It was a lifeline. She had seen the truth long before the rest of us, and now that the truth had finally surfaced, she wasn't going to let it disappear again. The next few days were heavy. Conversations with my mom, tense silences, long drives where no one spoke. But behind all of it, Claire was steady. She kept me grounded, reminded me that uncovering the truth is never painless, but always necessary. She didn't need to scream or blame. She simply showed what was real and let the weight of that truth do the rest. Her ability to see what no one else saw changed everything. It turned a forgotten photo album into a weapon of justice. And it made me realize that sometimes, the people who whisper instead of shout are the ones who carry the sharpest truths. Claire didn't just notice the photo, she understood its power. And with that quiet observation, she shifted the course of our lives. The photo wasn't the end. It was the beginning. After that night, Claire did what she always does when something feels off. She investigated. But this wasn't just curiosity. This was personal. She started tracing timelines, comparing dates, digging through public records, connecting small, seemingly meaningless dots that no one else would have thought to link. Her strength wasn't just in what she saw, it was in how she connected it all. She didn't come at it with emotion. That's what made it powerful. Where most people would fall apart, Claire became surgical. She didn't accuse, she questioned. She didn't demand, she listened. While the rest of us stumbled through confusion, she was building a quiet case brick by brick. There were nights I found her up late, laptop glowing in the dark, a wall of sticky notes slowly forming patterns behind her. Every document she pulled, every note she took, it all pointed to one truth. This man had never been who we thought he was. His name showed up in places it shouldn't have, co-signatures on properties, anonymous donations tied to our family's foundation, financial accounts opened years before he was officially part of our lives. Claire followed the paper trail, with the precision of someone who had done this before. And she had, in law school, she helped bring down a shady developer in a student legal clinic. But this wasn't an academic exercise. This was personal justice. One day, she showed me an email from over a decade ago. It was forwarded to her anonymously, sent to our family's lawyer, buried in a long thread of updates. The language was cold, calculated. It referred to someone as no longer a threat. That someone, we later found out, was my aunt, the same woman who had been quietly pushed out of the family business and never spoken of again. That email alone didn't prove anything, but Claire used it as a thread, and when she pulled it, the whole tapestry began to fall apart. And yet, through all of it, she remained calm. That's what made her different. She never made it about herself, even though she could have. She never once shouted. Her anger, if it was there, burned cold and steady. She wasn't looking for revenge. She was looking for clarity, for truth. And when she found it, she didn't drop it in someone's lap and expect change. She built a plan, a quiet one. She reached out to people who had been silenced. A former employee, a retired partner, a friend who had distanced herself after a strange falling out. And each one of them had a piece of the puzzle. Claire didn't need to explain much. All she had to do was ask, "Do you remember this?" and watch their faces fall. They remembered. They'd just been too afraid to speak, or convinced it wouldn't matter. But Claire made it matter. She filed 3 legal motions within 1 week. Nothing flashy, all procedural. She requested financial disclosures, subpoenaed documents, and reopened an old trust fund case that had been dormant for over 15 years. To the outside world, it looked like quiet legal housekeeping. But to those of us who understood the story behind the paperwork, it was a controlled burn. Claire was dismantling the power he'd built, not with chaos, but with structure. Not with shouting, but with strategy. And as the legal walls started to close in on him, he finally noticed. Not because someone confronted him, but because the things he'd hidden behind, his money, his influence, his polished reputation, were no longer protecting him. Bit by bit, it all started to fall away, and still Claire said nothing. She never gloated. She never smiled when he stumbled. She simply moved to the next step, the next motion, the next truth. She understood something I hadn't. True justice isn't loud. It's quiet. It moves like water, steady and unstoppable. And it comes not just from proof, but from persistence. From doing the hard thing even when no one is watching. That was Claire's power. She didn't just uncover the truth. She held it up piece by piece until no one could ignore it anymore. Claire had always been sharp, but there was something different in the way she handled this. It wasn't just about gathering evidence or exposing lies. It was about controlling every emotional beat along the way. After discovering the truth behind that photograph and the connections it hinted at, she didn't react with rage. She processed it. She felt it fully, yes, but then she put it into motion. What I saw during those weeks wasn't just a woman uncovering betrayal. It was a masterclass in emotional discipline. Where many would spiral into confrontation or breakdowns, Claire took a breath, stepped back and focused. She journaled obsessively, not to vent, but to track her emotional shifts. She wanted to be aware of her own patterns, when she felt impulsive, when she wanted to lash out, when her fear or pain clouded her judgment. That awareness didn't weaken her. It made her more dangerous. She wasn't suppressing her emotions. She was translating them into precision. Every text she didn't send, every call she didn't make, was a decision. There were so many moments when she could have exposed the truth prematurely, dropped a bomb, confronted him or others with fire. But Claire knew better. She'd seen too many people lose control and lose their case. Emotional release felt good, but it often destroyed leverage. So she waited. She let the silence do the heavy lifting, while she organized everything beneath the surface. Even in private, Claire kept her composure. When I asked how she could be so calm knowing what she knew, she looked at me and said, "He doesn't deserve my chaos. He only deserves consequences." That line stuck with me. It reframed the whole situation. To her, emotional restraint wasn't weakness. It was power. Every time she chose stillness over storm, she kept the upper hand. But it wasn't just about staying calm. Claire used emotion strategically. She showed compassion when needed, especially when reconnecting with people from the past, former colleagues, family members, friends who had distanced themselves after things got complicated. She made them feel safe, heard, validated, and in that space they opened up. Many of them still didn't know the full story, but they sensed something deeper happening, and they trusted her with pieces they hadn't shared in years. What Claire did better than anyone I've ever seen was hold duality. She could be furious and kind, heartbroken and focused, grieving and relentless all at once. She didn't force herself to choose between emotions or hide one to amplify another. Instead, she made room for all of it, and that's why she could keep going. Her strength wasn't robotic, it was deeply human. She just knew how to contain her feelings until the time was right to release them. There was one moment I'll never forget. Claire was reading through an old transcript, one that outlined part of the legal process her enemy had manipulated to protect himself years ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she highlighted sections, her breathing shallow. I could tell it hit her hard. She paused, closed the file, and just sat there. No words, no dramatics. Just stillness. I asked if she was okay. She said, "This hurts. But I'd rather feel it now than explode later." That was Claire. Feel it, file it, use it. This emotional control wasn't about pretending everything was fine. It was about choosing not to let emotion dictate the mission. Her goal wasn't to feel better. It was to make things right. That meant sacrificing the temporary satisfaction of confrontation for the lasting power of resolution. Every emotional delay was an investment in a more impactful ending. As weeks passed, I watched the people around her start to shift. The more calm and prepared she became, the more anxious they became. Her silence made them nervous. Her clarity made them suspicious. They didn't know what she knew, but they could feel the tension rising. And Claire used that, not manipulatively but tactically. She didn't have to warn anyone. Her energy did the talking. Her restraint was the warning. That's what made her unstoppable. Claire didn't need to scream or threaten or expose anyone with theatrics. She just waited until the right moment to act. Because revenge wasn't her goal. Justice was, and to her, the most powerful weapon wasn't evidence or strategy. It was control. The moment Claire decided to act, it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, surgical. She didn't storm into offices or accuse anyone publicly. Instead, she began building something far more terrifying. A legal case so airtight, so methodically crafted, that it would not just expose her enemy, but dismantle everything they had built. She wasn't looking for a headline. She was aiming for collapse. Claire's background as a lawyer gave her a unique edge. She knew the system, its strengths, its flaws, and its pressure points. But more than that, she knew how to move without being noticed. She didn't file anything under her own name. She used third parties, anonymous tips, and carefully planted seeds. She reconnected with people who had been burned, betrayed, or silenced years ago. People who had once been too afraid to speak now found courage in her quiet certainty. She never asked them to testify. Not yet, she simply listened, took notes, followed up. And over time, she built a dossier, pages of connections, contradictions, and patterns that pointed to the truth. Her sister had been set up, and the woman who orchestrated it all had hidden behind layers of false partnerships, ghost companies, and corrupted officials. Claire worked long nights piecing together corporate records, financial transfers, and legal discrepancies. Everything had to be perfect. She double-checked every citation, cross-referenced every statement, and made sure that if even one piece was challenged in court, she could defend it. She wasn't just trying to win, she wanted the truth to be undeniable. But her real genius was in timing. Rather than drop everything at once, Claire released it in waves. A quiet leak to a journalist known for investigative integrity, an anonymous package delivered to the Ethics Review Board, a confidential complaint filed just before the holidays, when most offices were short-staffed and slow to respond, but legally obligated to act. Each move was strategic, carefully designed to put pressure on different parts of the enemy's empire. The target didn't even realize it at first. In fact, she carried on as if nothing had changed, hosting galas, posting articles, speaking on panels about justice and empowerment, unaware that the floor beneath her was slowly cracking. But those closest to her began to sense something. Phone calls weren't returned. Partners pulled out of deals. Emails stopped flowing, and no one could explain why. Claire didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. She just kept going. Because for her, this wasn't about revenge. It was about balance, about correcting a lie that had stolen years from her sister and shattered a family. And every legal move she made brought her closer to that balance. One by one, the layers began to fall apart. A subpoena exposed a fake invoice. A former assistant came forward after seeing a familiar name in a news report. A forensic accountant connected the dots between campaign donations and court decisions. And when the truth began to surface publicly, Claire wasn't even in the spotlight. She watched from a distance as the media pieced together what she already knew and what her enemy had long buried. But the legal strike was only part of the impact. Claire had also prepared for the emotional fallout. She knew her enemy wasn't just afraid of jail. She was afraid of exposure, of losing the image she had built. So Claire made sure the legal unraveling coincided with public scrutiny, reputation audits, alumni boards revisiting awards, nonprofits distancing themselves. One after another, the enemy's pillars of power began to collapse, not from force, but from truth. The final blow wasn't a courtroom scene or dramatic arrest. It was a single letter, delivered by courier to the enemy's office. Inside was a copy of the original document that had framed Claire's sister, marked up with notes, legal highlights, and a short message. This time, the evidence is on our side. Claire never saw the enemy's reaction. She didn't need to. The silence that followed said everything. She didn't need a crowd to cheer or a judge to slam the gavel. Her victory wasn't loud, it was precise. A decade of silence, pain, and patience turned into one of the most devastating takedowns I'd ever witnessed. And through it all, Claire never raised her voice. She raised the truth. When the truth finally came out, it didn't explode. It unfolded like a storm cloud, finally breaking open after years of quiet pressure. Claire watched the downfall not with satisfaction but with solemnity. She had spent years quietly, methodically unweaving every lie, every layer of manipulation that had built the world her enemy thrived in. And now it was over. The woman who once sat on top of the world, untouchable, admired, applauded, was now a subject of investigations, public scorn, and internal collapse. Her carefully crafted image was destroyed by something more powerful than hate, facts. Claire had never needed to scream or threaten. The paper trail did all the speaking for her. Legal files, financial statements, testimonial fragments, small puzzle pieces that came together to reveal something massive. As news articles began circulating and institutions pulled away from the disgraced woman, people began talking again. Not whispers behind closed doors, but open admissions, colleagues who had long suspected her corruption, friends who had seen her cruelty but stayed silent, and even former clients who'd felt something was wrong but lacked the proof. Now they had it. Claire had handed it to them without ever asking for recognition. But the victory was deeper than headlines. It was personal. Claire's sister, after years of shame, trauma, and wrongful imprisonment, was finally exonerated. The court reopened the case, reviewed the new evidence Claire had quietly presented, and reached one conclusion: she had been framed. And now, after a decade of being labeled a criminal, she walked out of the courthouse free, with her name cleared and her dignity restored. That moment for Claire was the real justice. Not the downfall of the enemy, but the restoration of the innocent. There were no camera flashes, no big interviews. Claire had deliberately stayed in the background. She didn't want the credit, the attention, or the spotlight. What she wanted, what she had always wanted, was for her sister to feel free again, to breathe without shame, to walk without fear, to be seen not as the girl who went to prison, but as the woman who survived it. And the most beautiful part? Her sister didn't know everything Claire had done. She knew pieces, enough to understand that someone had fought for her. But the depth of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the legal chess game, the emotional restraint, it was all invisible. Because Claire had never done it to be praised. She had done it because it was right. Over the following months, Claire quietly withdrew from the battlefield she had dominated. She resigned from her position at the firm, donated her share of winnings from a recent case to a justice reform group, and moved to a quieter place by the coast. Not because she was running away, but because her mission was complete. She still kept her skills sharp, took on pro bono work, mentored young lawyers, and advocated for policy reform. But the fire that had once driven her was now calm. Purpose had replaced vengeance. Healing had replaced anger. One evening, while walking along the beach, Claire got a message from her sister. A simple line: "I'm smiling again." "You did that." She didn't need to reply. Tears filled her eyes, and a quiet peace settled in her chest. Her enemy, now stripped of power, was left to face the wreckage of her own creation. Claire never once reached out, never gloated, never sought an apology. She knew the truth had already spoken louder than anything else ever could. And while the world might remember Claire as the brilliant lawyer who brought down a corrupt empire, she would always remember herself as a sister, a protector, a quiet force who waited 10 years, not to destroy, but to rebuild what had been broken. She didn't just win a case, she reclaimed a life. And in doing so, she set herself free too. In the end, the courtroom wasn't just a place for justice. It was where the truth was finally spoken out loud. He didn't just lose control. He lost the mask he had worn for years. And while pain lingered, healing had begun. Not through revenge, but through truth, strength, and the unshakable bond of those who refused to stay silent. Claire didn't just fight the past. She rewrote our future, and this time the story was finally ours.